Why did U.S. Secret Service agents destroy text messages and their cell phones used on January 6th, even after Congress ordered them to preserve these devices? That's a great question. Why is the FBI hiding the identity of the man who planted two pipe bombs at the DNC and the RNC? Are we any closer to finding out more information about this cover-up? Who ordered this operation, and how high does it go? Darren Beattie has been covering this story from the very beginning over at Revolver News, doing an amazing job. And we thought we'd love to talk to Darren about his latest reporting around this pipe bomber, the cover-up, and the latest news around these Secret Service agents. Darren, thanks for joining us here on Redacted.
Great pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
My pleasure. I want to get to your latest reporting and what you're finding, lately, and how the story is unfolding. Since you've been on this since the very beginning. There's a lot of pieces that have been fast moving, and we're learning a lot more now in Congress as well. What we learned this week, specifically in Congress, that Secret Service agents destroyed text messages and their phones related to January 6th. We learned that from Congressman Thomas Massie. So just your thoughts on that, how they managed to delete these text messages, or at least they were corrupted information, and destroyed their phones even after being told to preserve them.
Well, that's a great piece of the puzzle here. And in fact, pretty shockingly, this isn't actually new information. This came out, I think, over a year ago, something like that. And there was a big outcry from the regime-approved media, which it interpreted this as meaning, oh, the Secret Service was part of the Trumpist coup against the government, and the Secret Service deleted its text because they were trying to protect Trump. That was the spin and the framework, and that was never frankly believable to anyone who understands how things actually function in the world. But that was the narrative. And, of course, because I've been on this pipe bomb story from the very beginning for years, I had always thought, okay, well, in overwhelming likelihood, a big part of that story is their cover. This is part of the pipe bomb cover up. But I think, it's interesting how the organic life of stories and how they reach the broader population. We've covered various aspects of January 6th. We're probably best known for our groundbreaking coverage on an individual called Ray Epps, which has kind of become almost a household name at this point. And that's thanks to us. Even, all the court documents acknowledge it. Ray Epps blames Revolver News for this, and he's right to blame us. And we're very proud of it. But the thing about Epps, and, this is really interesting because ultimately the story, the broader story surrounding Epps and the broader story surrounding the pipe bomb, I suspect these stories will converge as the pipe bomb story unfolds in its sort of final stages. But this is sort of a meta-analysis of how media works. The advantage with the Epps story was there was footage right off the bat, which is like tailor-made for a viral moment. There was that iconic video clip of this guy in his like camo gear and the Trump hat saying, "We need to go into the Capitol," and it doesn't, we've done extensive research. Anyone who reads our classic series, Meet Ray Epps Part 1 and Part 2, these are presented in excruciating and compelling detail. But at the end of the day, the video does so much of the legwork because anyone looking at that can understand the video in its context means something is fishy. So it was just sort of set up to go viral in a way that the pipe bomb story wasn't, even though the underlying factors of the pipe bomb case, as we've presented studiously over years in multiple major reports covering aspects of this, if you just sit down and read it and try to add it all up, it's just as egregious, but it's not as viscerally and immediately impactful as it would have been had there just been a video. And I think part of what's helped the pipe bomb story specifically reach escape velocity recently was this video of the discovery of the DNC bomb and just how egregious that was, namely the fact that it's very clear that the Secret Service concerned with this explosive device within feet of them, within feet of their protectee, who is none other than Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. And most flagrantly, but kind of conveniently for the purposes of just immediately visceral, kind of viral video moments, they allow a group of children to just like walk right by where that pipe bomb was. So that's that the help of that video to just drive home, and then situating the video within the broader context of our history of reporting on it. I think that combination has allowed this story to almost start to reach the levels where Epps was. And it's going to get even worse because it's unfolding very rapidly. But just that spectacle of the Secret Service clearly knew that the bomb was fake. They clearly knew that the bomb posed no threat. Then the obvious question is, how would the Secret Service agents tasked with covering Kamala Harris know that this recently discovered bomb was fake? How would they know not to, to be so unconcerned that they let kids walk by it? And yet, after the video, the publicly available footage ends, we know that they got a bomb-safe robot to defuse and dismantle the bomb. So why go through the spectacle of doing that? And there's so many other questions, like this one was the second one discovered. So why didn't you look for a third bomb? It was clear that there was knowledge. The circumstances surrounding the discovery of this DNC bomb are totally artificial and pretextual, not what just, we just randomly happened to find this thing that was sitting out there for 17 hours undiscovered, and we just magically and randomly stumbled upon it 15 minutes after the first pipe bomb was discovered, and within a 15-minute window that corresponds exactly to the unfolding attack on the Capitol, the attack which kicked off at that west side of the perimeter, that west perimeter breach by the bike rack in which Ray Epps was very much involved. So that's where the synchronicity comes in and the stories start to converge. But as for the Secret Service in particular, when you branch out into the various kind of circumstantial and contextual elements, as I mentioned, they're there to protect Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris is VP elect. Kamala Harris is trying to milk January 6th for all it's worth, as are the Democrats, and they've been doing this from day one. So then the obvious question is, why did Kamala Harris not mention this at all? Why did she cover up the fact that she was in the DNC building on the 6th? It only leaked out like almost a year after January 6th, but Kamala still hasn't publicly acknowledged it. Why isn't this politically opportunistic creature on every television program saying, it's not just theoretical, this problem of MAGA terrorism. I myself, the first woman of color VP elect, I myself came within a hair's width of losing my life to this domestic terrorist MAGA pipe bomb. Why wouldn't Joe Biden, for that matter? He gave a big speech on the third anniversary of January 6th. And, we all know Biden's limitations, which are fairly manifest. He can't stand up for more than 5 minutes. Usually, if he's going to give a speech for over an hour, that means it's a pretty big deal. It's pretty important to what he's trying to do and the narrative they're trying to reinforce. And so why take that whole hour-long speech and not say, oh, by the way, this dangerous MAGA terrorism that I'm, amplifying to absurd levels of exaggeration? By the way, my own vice president almost lost her life to the MAGA pipe bomb. Zero mention of that.
Right.
Why? And you combine that with the fact that it's Kamala Harris's Secret Service that clearly knew that the bomb was fake, as is evidenced by this video. And then you add it to the fact that conveniently and in flagrant and direct contravention of protocols and the law of retention records, the Secret Service deleted its communications that clearly would have been relevant to understanding why they were so concerned with these bombs. And then there's institutional factors as well. This came up in Congressman Massey's exchange with the former head of the January 6th committee, which is a total sham committee, which is a different story, but somewhat connected.
It's a joke.
And
Benny Thompson, yeah.
It's a joke. Yeah, it's a joke committee, but it came up there, and we've covered this. We've all this stuff. We've covered it a long time ago, but the Secret Service of the United States is institutionally under the Department of Homeland Security.
Right.
Now, that's interesting for a number of reasons, because the DHS is clearly the tip of the spear when it comes to these kind of dirty operations against Trump supporters. It's the tip of the spear when it comes to basically the national security states sort of repurposing toward domestic political concerns. DHS ridiculously has kind of come out publicly and said, "Oh, the number one threat to national security is, white supremacy," by which they, clearly mean Trump supporters and the like. But Benny Thompson, who was the chair of the J6 committee, which is clearly, cover-up thing designed to basically tee off a fake indictment that they could use to go against Trump criminally. Benny Thompson, and this is something we've been covering for years, but it hasn't really sedimented into the public consciousness yet. Benny Thompson was the DHS's man in Congress. He wasn't just the chair of the J6 committee. He was the 9-time chair of the Homeland Security Committee in Congress. Whenever the Democrats controlled Congress, Benny Thompson was the chair of the Homeland Security Committee. These are the guys who liaise directly with the DHS. He's effectively their representative in Congress. So how interesting, but to see that connection where he was the DHS's man in Congress. He was also leading this sham investigation of January 6th. The DHS formally controls the Secret Service, and yet there was no interest whatsoever into this pipe bomb issue, which you think, they're trying to build this up into an event of domestic terror. The one thing somewhat resembling what we would conventionally recognize as terror are explosive devices, pipe bombs.
Right.
Technically speaking, the government considers pipe bombs to be weapons of mass destruction. And nothing. And, the one thing that could have been relevant, the communications Secret Service. Oh, yeah, those got deleted. It's like,
and they got deleted under Mayorkas.
Yeah.
Well, I think that was the big. Exactly. That was what was, I think, a big revelation from these hearings, and what we learned from Thomas Massie, that under the Secret Service, of course, the Secret Service falls under the Homeland Security Department, and Alejandro Mayorkas, of course, who just narrowly evaded impeachment. This happened under him, and apparently does it look like these deletions happened under Mayorkas, even though it was talked about being under Trump, under the Secret Service, while Trump was still in power. That's an important distinction.
It is important. I personally cannot confirm that. If that's been confirmed, then that's interesting. It's important, but ultimately, I think people kind of exaggerate the significance of, was this done under Trump versus others? The fact is, and I served in the Trump administration. I was his speechwriter in the White House for quite some time. In the early stage of administration, I saw how it worked from the inside. The reality was that Trump really didn't have control over the executive branch. And so I think there are people, who say, look at Christopher Wray. He was under Trump, or the whole Michigan kidnapping fiasco that was clearly an entrapment operation. They're saying, well, that happened under Trump. Well, yeah, it happened under Trump, but it wasn't like it was happening at his direction or in his interest. Quite the contrary. It was set up precisely in order to undermine everything that he was trying to do. And so once you understand that all of these bureaucracies were basically hostile to him, the significance of what happened under Trump versus after Trump, it was always against Trump, even when he was formally the head of the executive branch, I guess is my point. Right. And there were a lot of dirty things happening under him that were, specifically directed to undermine him in the most critical fashion possible.
Oh, when you think about 4 million Americans work in the executive branch, right? That's right. So that he has control over every one of them, and the same thing should apply to Biden, right? I mean, we should have that same threshold for President Biden when we're being critical in this way. I think of these massive bureaucracies.
It's different. it's just a different dynamic because Biden is sort of swimming with the current. So when you swim with the current of basically where the bureaucracies are, there's an alignment. Whereas with Trump, it's like he was kind of single-handedly against these bureaucracies. He was against the current. And so you had a very different kind of dynamic in terms of what he was able to do and his relationship with these bureaucracies. If they're all swimming in the same direction, basically, then it doesn't really matter that ultimately the president doesn't have control over these bureaucracies, because you don't need control because you're both going in the same direction, more or less to the same purposes.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. I want to talk about the individual though. It seems like we're getting to critical mass right now. And it seems like there are at least a number of people online who are saying, hey, we've got this person's information. Are you going to come forward and publicly go public with who this individual is that was carrying these 2 pipe bombs? And we know from Kyle Seraphin, former FBI agent, counterterrorism, that they had been on this task force to follow a person of interest related to the January 6th pipe bomb. When they got close to it, they were called off of that investigation and sent to smaller, low-level January 6th related issues. So it seems like they know exactly who this is. And we're sort of just circling around and waiting for someone to release this person's information. I mean, do you think that we're close to learning the identity of this person?
I think we are close to learning that, but I don't know if I would relate that to those other aspects that you've described. I think there's a lot, when we get this close, because we are very close, especially with the video of the DNC combined with, or the context created by our research combined with some other things, like we are very close. We're in the end stages, and for that reason, the regime can no longer suppress the story. They can only do damage control. And part of damage control mode versus suppression mode is, I hate to use this word because it's been so raped beyond semantic, integrity, is disinformation.
Right.
There's a lot of disinformation that comes out at these last stages in order to distract, but also as kind of fool's gold for people to latch onto and somehow be disproven, thereby discrediting the things that are actually real. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that everything is. It just means there's a lot out there. And so specifically for me, because my reporting, Revolver News's reporting, is sort of, I think it's fair to say, has been the gold standard for January 6th things. And there's enough that I'm so confident in that is totally backed up, that's already out there, that's damning enough. I'm very careful to kind of attached to anything, one of the things floating around for those reasons. And I think even some of the people sort of talking about this, that they could be victims of disinformation themselves, or it could be true. Who knows? But I don't want to kind of go out on a limb like that when basically I've seen no compelling evidence to think that this is the case. Like, there may have been that. I don't really doubt that there's somebody that was a person of interest, but that could have meant a lot of things. And especially with these, you can be put in a position where they want someone to come out and say it, and then, all of a sudden you get a defamation suit and it's not the person. So there's a lot of traps there, and there's a lot of traps out there. And so I'm reluctant to kind of endorse that particular thread. I think the idea of that there was a person of interest and called off, I suspect that's probably valid. But the stuff of, we know who it is and we're going to release, I mean, that's, to me, is just as credible as any other kind of random thing that I'd see out there. And I'm cautious for that reason.
So you would call that pyrite. You would call that fool's gold. like this idea that we know who you are. We have the sort of floating around right now on Twitter threads and otherwise. Just come forward.
I
We
would
already know who
say,
you are.
I mean, I don't know. I truly have no idea, but I haven't seen any evidence behind it. And so I have to classify that and say any kind of random person would say it.
Right.
Um, who knows? Sometimes these things are true. I'm not saying not, but it needs to reach a higher threshold of credibility for me to kind of incorporate that into my understanding of things, or to kind of even endorse it as in any kind of public sense, because there's that's just the nature of things. At these late stages, there's a lot of disinformation, a lot of smokescreen, and even the people talking about that, it's not nothing against them. They could be they could be right, it could be disinformation, they don't know it could be a lot of things. But if I latch onto this and then it's not true, and then they say, oh well, Darren Beattie, Revolver News, he latched onto this ridiculous theory, and then all of a sudden all the huge stuff that we've done that's totally valid is like, oh, you throw that away too. That's why it's like,
Right.
that's one of the reasons, as we're in this late stage of investigation, part of the damage control strategy in the regimes, from the regime standpoint, is to prevent spillover legitimacy from accruing to specifically me and Revolver News, because once they determine, okay, this is going to come out in some fashion, they're going to want to give it to a more domesticated journalist. They might pick someone. I think there's somebody at CBS that they're grooming for this. They might groom someone else for this. But the idea is, God, we wish we could have suppressed this entirely. It's reach escape velocity. It's going to come out in some fashion. We have to minimize the damage. The last thing we want is Revolver News getting the legitimacy from this huge story,
Right.
because it's not just like a victory lap thing. It's, if they get legitimacy for this, then the next thing they cover we won't be able to dismiss it so cavalierly. And they
Right.
don't want that. They don't want the spillover legitimacy. They want, okay, so at the very least, let's give it to someone more domesticated who won't use the legitimacy from this to further undermine the stuff that we're doing, in the
Right.
future. We know. So that's part of the game as well. So for that reason, I've always tried to be, especially now at this late stage when there's so much that we already have, to be very cautious about this. But if people are claiming, oh, they know who the pipe bombers and this or that, then I invite anyone claiming that, say who it is. Or if you're worried about a defamation thing, say, here's the evidence I have, and it suggests this or that. There's ways to phrase it, and then the public, not just me, but the public domain, can evaluate the credibility of that.
And it seems to me that you bring up a great point about the cover up piece of this, and the way in which this rolled out. So they knew this was fake. I mean, I guess that, to me, it reminds me of that Seinfeld episode where Costanza hits his elbow, and then he for the whole episode he continues to put on this charade about having an elbow problem, where he keeps walking around and he has to carry out this whole charade for anyone he runs into where he's got an elbow problem, where he has to go to a specialist and his elbow keeps flailing around uncontrollably. So this story, do you believe that these pipe bombs started out that way, where they were going to carry it to fruition, having a bomb robot show up and put on this whole display about it? They're having to explode this thing, and oh my God, Kamala Harris was under threat, and this was also at the RNC. Or did this thing get away from them and they lost control of this?
That's a fantastic question. And here, again, I like to be very careful, because here we're in much more speculative territory. Like,
Right.
I'm 100% confident it's a cover up. I'm 100% confident they knew it was fake. I'm 100% confident that the DNC bomb was not discovered just innocently and randomly, that it was discovered artificially under false pretenses. I'm 100% convinced that the fact that both of these bombs were sitting in their respective locations for between 16 and 17 hours undiscovered, and they're both independently, randomly discovered within a 15-minute window that perfectly corresponded with the unfolding attack on the Capitol. I am 100% confident that that synchronicity is not simply a coincidence. But what was ultimately intended? Was it an insurance policy? Was it meant to be a bigger false flag of some sort? Or was it just meant as a decoy and as an excuse? If you look at some of the earlier coverage of the pipe bomb, and this is totally consistent with what former Capitol Police Chief Steve Sund is on the record as having theorized, is that the bombs were never meant to go off. The bombs were meant to be a diversion. They were meant to help the narrative. First of all, bombs are terroristy, so that sounds dangerous. That elevates the severity of J6. But also, they're saying, well, the Capitol Police and authorities began responding to the bomb at 12:50, whereas the Ray Epps attack on the west perimeter of the Capitol occurred at 12:53. And they're on record as saying part of the reason that we weren't able to stave off that initial phase of the attack was that we diverted our resources to respond to these pipe bombs. So it could simply be that they needed a better excuse, saying, why did you have uniquely poor security? Why do you have like 3 people standing out there by the bike ride? Well, everything was unfolding at once. We had to divert our resources to these pipe bombs, and there's just more confusion and this or that. So there are a lot of things that, there could have been the one
Right.
agency had some, weird idea, false flag idea, and that was harebrained. And then, it was too late to kind of put an axe on that, and so other agencies just went along with it, and then another agency found out about it, say the FBI found out about it, and say, oh my god, this is so stupid, but the identities would be so damaging to our narrative that they're covering up. So it could be one agency kind of did it with the knowledge and complicity of another agency, and then a third agency found out in the course of their investigation, and they're like, okay, this is too embarrassing, and that became part of the cover-up. So there are a lot of configurations that are consistent with this clearly bogus fact pattern, but it's simply at this point more a matter of speculation. But I would say that it's not part of the damage control. I suspect is the regime will try to cordon this off and compartmentalize it into this is just a pipe bomb scandal, which frankly is big enough to be one of the biggest national scandals in a long time. It's a big deal. Especially because of that Kamala Harris thing. Like, she clearly knows it's an op because she had, that's the only reason I can think of that would explain why she leaves that shiny bar of gold on the table that she could have been milking politically. Like,
Right.
and the thing is that the regime has been so desperate. One of the scams, the hoaxes that we exposed very early on in the J6 saga was the story of this Capitol police officer, Brian Sicknick, who tragically lost his life. But originally the media had reported that he was bludgeoned to death by the mob.
Right.
That was clearly untrue. We said that was untrue. The media changed their story to saying, oh, he died as a result of complications from being sprayed with bear spray. We actually proved that was false too. We did a heat map image analysis of the video from January 6th and proved that he didn't even get sprayed by the spray that they said he did. And so finally, their last iteration was, oh, he died of natural causes. But my point is not just to resurrect that fiasco, is to say that case, that the ridiculous amount of manifestly false, just not even exaggeration, just myth making that they were willing to engage in. That shows how desperate they were for something heavy.
Right. And they would absolutely use this. They would use
They had
this.
something heavy. They wouldn't have had to exaggerate even with Kamala Harris. She was in the building when the bomb was there. that doesn't require exaggeration. That's
Right.
like literally the one thing that they don't have to exaggerate. And for whatever reason, that's the one thing that they've studiously covered up.
Interesting. When you think about President Biden in Philadelphia with the red backdrop, the ominous red backdrop with the Imperial Guard soldiers back there warning America about the greatest threat to the United States, of course, is MAGA extremists. He could have used that opportunity once again to remind all of us that my vice president almost lost her life because of a pipe bomb placed at the DNC headquarters. No mention of it at all. It's very, very
He hasn't
strange.
mentioned it ever. Kamala Harris has not mentioned it ever. She has not even acknowledged that she was in the DNC. That was covered up for almost a year and was leaked out. And in fact, she didn't even correct the Department of Justice. In several indictments of J6 defendants, in the indictment, it's mentioned that Kamala Harris was in the Capitol, which is actually not true. She was in the DNC building. So, yeah, they just went through great lengths to cover this up, and it came out. But to this day, there's no acknowledgement of it. And then all of a sudden, we get this video of the DNC discovering the bomb, of the Secret Service discovering the bomb, actually notified by a plainclothes Capitol police officer. But the Secret Service clearly know it's fake. And they're the guys protecting Kamala, who's covered up her presence there. So, yeah, I mean, these are remarkable things. And but I was saying, in terms of the damage control, they're going to want to cordon this off to just the pipe bomb. But the synchronicity between the pipe bomb and the West Perimeter attack means they can't really contain it. It's not contained because there were two I call smoking guns of the Fedsurrection. And we've reported on these things extensively, but largely independently. And one, I mentioned the Ray Epps series, but it's not just about Ray Epps. If people go to Revolver News and revisit probably the classic piece that majorly put us on the map in terms of shaping the national conversation, it's called Meet Ray Epps Part 2. There's a lot of interesting things about Epps, but it's not really about Epps. It's about the entire shady, suspicious circumstance at the Peace Monument prior to and immediately after that first and decisive breach. The thesis being supported by ample video evidence that even though the official narrative is basically the initial breach happened, the Proud Boys got there, they burst down the bike racks, and that was it. Well, we show that there are a number of really suspicious characters who were pre-positioned at that Peace Monument location before the Proud Boys even got there. Unlike the Proud Boys who've gotten, crazy sentences, these people haven't been indicted. These people haven't even been identified in many cases. For instance, the scaffold commander, that we still don't know who this person is, who's removing fencing in advance and positions himself up with a bullhorn telling people, move forward, move forward, move forward. We need your help. We need your help, and so forth. The booby trap was set up very systematically. And part of that was the West Perimeter breach happening at that specific time. And so the theory that's really coming together in terms of the convergences, Proud Boys had a lot of connections with federal agencies. Pretty much everyone at the senior level was a witting or unwitting informant. Everybody at the senior level, from Tario to Biggs, the whole guys, they're on record as having extensive communication with various FBI and other agencies, Metro PD, in the months leading up to and basically during January 6th. And so at the very least, it wouldn't be a secret that they're going to end up at the Peace Monument at 1 p.m. The authorities clearly knew that. If it wasn't directed by the authorities to say, hey, why don't you guys show up there? One way or another, I think there was some mutual understanding that they would end up at that West Perimeter location at that time.
And the scaffolding
Because
guy
that's where all
removing scaffolding in order for them to move forward.
Because that's where the real players were pre-positioned before the Proud Boys got there. So, I think the Proud Boys are a complicated case. I think, a lot of them are just simply reckless and have very poor judgment. Others, may have, the idea of being an informant, or an agent or an asset or something. These are vague terms. Like, people like this, they develop relationships with people in law enforcement, in the FBI, and whether, and you're just texting them. It could just be like, and, months ago, Joe Biggs is on record as having coordinated with the FBI to help them identify Antifa people. So it's like, oh, we need your help. We get it. Those Antifa people are so bad and dangerous. We need your help. Oh, there's a line of communication established. And then it was like, oh, we don't want to go after you. We know you guys are just exercising your First Amendment, but just to do us a favor, to make our jobs easier, just kind of let us know where you're planning to be. And they're on record as having done that. So does that make them an informant? Yes, no, maybe. Like, who knows? But they're in communication. That's my point.
Right.
Although, like, Tario had actually been an informant before, and there's extensive records of him communicating with the head of intel at the Metro PD, which is another story that is not ripe to tell quite yet. But the point is the Proud Boys, in the general sense, I think, were set up as patsies for January 6th. They were set up to be at that location where the first breach kicked off, but they had actual, competent professionals there, not the Proud Boys who were pre-positioned there, who actually made sure that it kicked off. And this was all perfectly synchronized with the quote unquote random discovery of the pipe bombs. Just to give you a sense of the timing, let me tell you how the first pipe bomb was discovered. So the first pipe bomb, people call it the RNC bomb. It's not really the RNC bomb. It was discovered behind a trash can in back alley by the Capitol Hill Club, which is like adjacent to the RNC. Like the DNC bomb, it was planted the evening before, around 8:30. DNC bomb was planted around 8 o'clock. The RNC one around 8:30. So this first bomb that was discovered behind a trash can in a back alley, it was sitting there for over 16 hours. And then after 16 hours, a random pedestrian stumbles upon it at 12:40 p.m. Here's it gets even crazier. So she stumbles upon it at 12:40 p.m. She goes to the Capitol Hill Club, notifies a security person there who happens to be a veteran of the Capitol Police. The Capitol Police start responding to this bomb at 12:50, which is, I mentioned, 3 minutes before that breach on the west perimeter of the Capitol. But here's the crazy part. Carlin Younger is the name of this allegedly a random pedestrian who discovers the first bomb. She reported that when she found that first pipe bomb at 12:40, it had a timer on it. These are hour-long kitchen timers. And it had 20 minutes left on the dial. And then that, in fact, it was stuck on 20 minutes. So let's do the math. 12:40 plus 20 is 1 p.m., exactly when the certification of the vote proceeding was to begin in Congress. So if she did discover this at any other minute, we wouldn't align exactly to 1 p.m. Think about that. The bomb is sitting there for 16 hours, and this woman discovers it at 12:40 with 20 minutes left on the dial, perfectly lining up to 1 p.m. So, like, basically perfectly synchronized both to the certification of vote proceeding and the attack on the Capitol. And then after she discovers this, no more than 15 minutes later, the DNC bomb is randomly discovered, and that had been sitting out there for 17 hours undiscovered. The DNC bomb is randomly discovered 15 minutes after.
Do we have cell phone verification of this woman finding it exactly at that moment? I mean, if I discover a bomb, the last thing I'm doing is looking at my watch to mark the time. And she's precise in this knowledge of this time, which I find odd.
Well, I find it odd too, because the precision is so damning. Like,
right.
Why would you give something, like, even if that's the case, say something else, because it just the fact that it's aligned perfectly to 1 o'clock just makes the story less believable. It So I'm puzzled by that, frankly. But I think within a range of 5 minutes, it has to be accurate because we know when the Capitol Police started responding to the bomb, and it was at 12:50. So whether she found it at 12:40 or 12:43 or whatever,
Yeah.
still it's like the timing is synchronous to an extent that is infinitesimally improbable.
How many, I'll get you out of here on this, Darren, which is the big questions that linger in your mind. And we don't have to go through 30 of them, but if there are like 3 of the biggest ones that are standing out to you still that we want answers to, that you're struggling with, wrestling with, that if you had the crowd, the power of the crowd to get answers to, what would it be? What would they be?
Boy, that's a great question. I mean, frankly, the big, I think the pipe bomb thing is very close to being solved. I think we all more or less know that the Ray Epps thing is what it was. If I could know one thing January 6th related, I would like to know who the scaffold commander is. This guy that I mentioned, who is one of the guys prepositioned at the Peace Monument, who's clearly like one of the most egregious actors. Not only has he not been indicted, he hasn't even been identified. And I've gone to considerable lengths to identify him to no success. And again, it's, I mentioned this disinformation stuff. And I don't say that, in a way to ascribe malicious intent, just stuff that's out there without, a lot of credibility or verification behind it. There's various reports of, scaffold commander is this particular guy. Some people think he's some left-wing reporter from The Nation. It's like, and the thing is, there's interesting, it's not, when you look at it, it's not like, you first hear it and you say, okay, that's totally laughable. And then you look at it and say, I can't laugh as much, but still. But the thing is, there's just, for these kinds of things, especially given how much we've undermined the false narrative, in order to go out on a limb, make claims, they really require more verification. And so I don't know, like it could be anyone, could be the guy that they say. I frankly doubt it, but he is someone, and this is a person, and this is a person who should be identified. And I suspect once identified, that will open up another sort of scandalous dimension of January 6th. So yeah, that's the one place that I think I worry that that's going to be a dead end and never be resolved. Whereas my confidence level for the pipe bomb issue is quite high at the moment. I think we're at that escape velocity where the momentum is on our side, and I suspect in the coming like 2 months or so, it'll get really crazy, but in a good way.
So you think we're very close to figuring out who this pipe bomber is?
Yes, and not only figuring out who it is, but having a much more concrete and definite understanding of what the operation and cover up was. Because,
Right.
The person who actually planted the bomb is not, I mean, that's really only important insofar as it sheds light on the bigger story of what was going on with that. What was going on with that cover up. But yeah, it's a major scandal. I mean, it's just so damning. And you think about the stakes involved, how much the regime has invested in this false January 6th narrative. But if the pipe bomb thing is a hoax and an operation and a cover up, and if that West Perimeter breach is also an operation, then the entire January 6th thing is an operation. It's a Fedsurrection, just like we've been calling it for years now.
And you've been doing an amazing job. I would encourage our audience to go over to revolver.news. That's the website, revolver.news. Read Darren's reporting and the team's reporting over there. It's been fantastic. I'm waiting on with bated breath. I want to, refresh my browser refresh my browser to see when your next report is coming. So, I feel like it's coming very, very soon. So very excited about that. Darren, great to see you. Thank you so much for your reporting. Thanks for spending the hour with us and talking about the latest pieces of this and the lingering questions that still remain. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
I really hope you enjoyed watching this video. You know, YouTube thinks that you'll actually like this next video right here. It's personalized based on your own viewing habits. So if you watch the video, please leave a comment. Let us know what you think about it. And we will see you next time, everyone.